Hey guys, what's up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as per usual, we'll go over Tesla, the market and whatnot, and essentially see what has happened and what is in store for, I guess, the rest of the week, really. So yeah, as per usual, if you enjoyed the video, find it useful, helpful, informative, or whatever, don't forget to hit that like button. It does help a lot. And of course, this is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. Make your own decisions, do your own research, etc. Blah 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 blah. So all that being said and done, Tesla market closing in a minute and a half, but looking like Tesla will be closing somewhere around this 192.5 level, which will be down about 1.2% or so on the day compared to the market. Tesla pretty much more or less performing roughly in line, nothing too substantial in either direction. And in all honesty, pretty snooze fest of a day, right? Nothing really too crazy has happened today, but this is kind of what we were expecting, right? So we'll go over all that, but on our side, you can see in the daily, it is kind of crossing below the median, which isn't great, but that's not too bad yet. You can see over here, back here, did also cross below it, but then it came above it, and then back below. So, the fact that it is crossing under is not a great sign. Definitely want to have it come back above the median line, if you will, here, hopefully as soon as possible. But, we'll see, of course, what actually happens with that. So, all that being said, though, we talked about yesterday how we personally expect, or I guess I personally expect, or whatever, that for the most part, Tesla is going to be in limbo land, right? We discussed that, saying how essentially as long as Tesla is trading between the 200 price, the price of $200 per share and around the price of about 180, kind of 5 to 7-ish, around this range right here, pretty much right around this box. We'll just say 186 to be safe. As long as it's trading anywhere in this range, it is going to be more or less kind of a boring dead stock, really. I mean, the one thing you can do, in my opinion, is, of course, if it comes down to somewhere down here, that's a potential entry for bulls, right? Or to enter a bullish trade or swing trade or whatever. If it's up here, that's a potential to, enter a bearish swing trade or, day trade even, or whatever, right? So keep that in mind. But essentially, simplest way to put it, as long as we're in this area and until Tesla breaks one of these areas once again and confirms a break, right? Not just like a quick break and then collapse, kind of like what we saw yesterday. Until that happens, Tesla is essentially, for the most part, going to be potentially, not doing a whole lot, really. It's going to be just essentially decaying the theta of anyone that has bought puts or calls, really. And they're really going to be feeling the pain. And that's kind of what happens, right? That's the risk you take when you buy options, right? As opposed to sell options. You have to play with time, unless of course you bought a lot of time for yourself. But if you're someone that's holding, especially weeklies, yeah, this is going to definitely hurt quite a bit. So keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. That is, of course, really important. And a few other things we'll discuss today is going to be TSLQ, the VIX, and of course SPY as well, because they are not looking too hot, and that of course may affect Tesla. But for Tesla, as of right now and as it stands, we are still barely bouncing above the 21 EMA, so that's not bad, right? We're still, the bullish indicators are still kind of holding there, right? Again, above that 186 level, above the 21 EMA. We're still holding above all those, which is good for now. That's not a bad sign. We are potentially approaching the median line, if you will, the white line of the Bollinger Band, right, which is pretty much exactly at that 187-ish level we just talked about. Also a pretty important level, so wouldn't be surprised if we do come down there. So again, in my kind of, if I were to take a guess, if you will, a wild guess as to what happens next, the fact that it's actually holding above this kind of 190, 191-ish level so far is actually not a bad sign. But even with that being said, I still wouldn't be surprised if Tesla does ultimately come down somewhere to around this level here, maybe tomorrow, maybe sometime this week, and then from there potentially does a little bit of a bounce, potentially gets kind of close to 200, but most likely not exactly to it, maybe like very high 190s, like 197, and then it does something like this and kind of gets tighter and tighter like this, kind of does one of those things, right, where it's kind of just trading in a tighter and tighter range like this until it, of course, eventually finally decides to break out in either direction like this, right? That something like that would not be surprising, because it also doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of catalysts really this month for a while. And I believe Tesla's earnings is, let me see, Tesla, I can't remember when they were actually reporting like their earnings and the earnings call and all of that stuff. Let me see if I can find it for 2023 Q1. They said that their earning call is going to be Wednesday, April 19th. So that's like a decent amount of time away, right? That's pretty much 2 weeks and 1 day, or I guess 2 weeks from tomorrow. There is a chance that we're getting, like, maybe not exactly the full 2 weeks, but definitely, maybe a week and a half or so of potentially nothing too completely crazy, which in a way could be a good thing, right? Depending on how you're trading and where you're looking at, or maybe if you're just sick and tired of Tesla being so volatile. But there's a chance that happens, right? So keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, it was right here. I didn't even realize I could look at it right here. But yeah, so the earnings is, of course, going to happen right around here. So again, wouldn't surprise me if we just kind of, do something like this for a while until earnings, and then the earnings can pretty much dictate that direction once again, as kind of the more or less deliveries have done so far recently from over here, which, you know, if you bought up here and you're holding pretty much from this 206 level long term, I mean, very long term, it's fine. But short term, yeah, might not be so great, right? So that's kind of what I'm seeing with Tesla, right? You know, we're above those meaningful moving averages, right? The 200 moving average is still well above us, which, you know, technically still a chance we go all the way over there. But again, you know, you want to break 200 for that level. And to go to the downside, you definitely want to be breaking that 186 level to go even further down. So at the very least, you know, mid 160s, if not all the way to my main price target of around this kind of 150, give or take-ish area, pretty much within this gap, more or less, which we talked about several times, which of course is just as simple as taking the Fibonacci retracement, going from the swing low to the swing high in this case, right? And, you know, where is it going to go? Well, in this case, it does seem like the 0.5 to the 0.618 level seems to be a pretty common retracement level. And I would not be surprised to see it come down somewhere around these levels over here. So that's pretty much where I get that from. And of course, also just a massive gap that looks like it at some point definitely needs to be filled, right? But again, if this were to happen, that also most likely means the market itself will potentially be, you know, falling essentially in line with Tesla. So keep that in mind. It's not, I'm just saying Tesla only, nothing else. 50-day moving average, you can see we are, of course, bouncing above it. These are all like pretty major indicators that people are looking at. So keep that in mind, right? 50 moving average, 100, 200, things like that, 21 EMA. And then you have short-term moving averages. A lot of people like to look at for like shorter trades, like for instance, the 5 or the 10-day moving average, which we are actually now closing below. Keep that in mind, which can be short-term bearish, which is why I personally wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if we come down to somewhere around that 187-ish level before we bounce up and then start doing that zigzag consolidation between that 187 to 197-ish level up until pretty much more or less earnings for Tesla. Now, that's essentially what I'm seeing for Tesla as of right now, right? Moving along though quickly, so you can see TSLQ, which is essentially the opposite of what TSLA does, of course, right? You can see it is kind of looking like, you know, it's potentially showing some strength. Overall, it still has that bearish or bullish divergence setting up where it came down to the same level, pretty much, you know, exactly the same level, maybe slightly higher, but not much, barely higher, but, you know, meaningfully higher on the RSI, right? That's a bullish divergence right there. So keep that in mind. You know, that is definitely something to consider. So that's, you know, looking like it's potentially looking for a bounce, but it does also very short term start looking like it's a little bit toppy. And I wouldn't be surprised if this does look for a way down a tiny bit, maybe down to around 44 or so, which again would give Tesla room to come up to around that 197-ish level, right? So it kind of makes sense to me both ways there as well. Because again, if this goes down, Tesla goes up. If Tesla goes down, TSLQ goes up. Moving on to SPY very quickly, you can see it is definitely finding some resistance here. As you can see, I honestly should have entered puts. I don't know why I didn't. This was like pretty obvious one, but nonetheless, you know, SPY, you know, getting rejected at the overall yellow trend line that it has held for quite a while, or has been holding prior to for quite some time, ever since these lows over here, as it was kind of, you know, making its wedge upwards, right? And then ultimately it finally broke down from all the way over here, made a pretty sizable move to the downside, and ever since it has been climbing back up to retest this breakdown. Like we always say, usually a breakout or a breakdown, it's very common to at some point follow it up with a retest, right? You can argue that this was it as well, but this is more like a major retest right here, which if it fails, that would be fairly bearish. And it also is potentially setting up a head and shoulders pattern, which of course is a bearish pattern in this scenario, where that also would not be a good sign as well. So just keep all those things in mind, ladies and gentlemen, because if the SPY, of course, looks like it's bearish and looks like it wants to move down, well, I'm sure you can take a, you know, wild guess as to what that means for Tesla. QQQ as well, similar, looking a little bit bearish as well, finding a little bit of top, you know, resistance here. But the most important thing is that it's setting up a bearish divergence, where you can see right here and right here, right? And on the RSI, you can see, even though the stock did go higher, the RSI did end up actually going lower than this area over here, even though the stock is, or I guess QQ is higher, the index, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind, which is of course a bearish trait. And the final thing I want to look at very quickly is of course the VIX. The VIX is, this is the one that's the most troubling in my opinion. It's having a lot of issues, man. This thing is really just not finding any like light at the end of the tunnel right now. It's really trying to look for a bounce, right? But you can see every time it does bounce, it's just getting severely rejected, and it's having issues even going back above 20, let alone even 19 at this point, right? So every single time it's tried to go back into the category or the territory of 19, and in this case it pretty much got rejected right at 20. It's definitely getting some, you know, having some issues kind of following through, which isn't good, right? So we'll see what that comes into, because the VIX is still looking, at least for now, a little bit bearish, right? Doesn't look that great, which is good for the market. So, you know, we'll see where that ends up being. There's a lot of conflicting things happening right now, but the easiest way to think about it when it comes to the VIX is whenever the VIX is in the teens, and especially the mid-teens, so like, you know, maybe closer to 15, like 15, 16, maybe even 17, but especially like 15 and 16, that is usually like a horrendous time to be long on the market, or in this case, or in other words, bullish on the market, because the VIX more often than not does find a way to bounce. And as I'm sure you guys can guess at the moment, if the VIX bounces, the market is most likely going to be looking pretty ugly, right? And vice versa, right? If the VIX is ever somewhere near the high 20s, potentially even in the 30s, that's usually a time to slowly start exiting your bearish situations and start buying long positions or bullish positions. That's like the very rough way to think about it, but it's easier said than done, because usually when the VIX does have spikes like this, that usually means something bad has happened around the world, whether it's just America, whether it's the world itself, or whatever. So it ends up being a little bit difficult to actually follow through and make a purchase and buy stocks that you believe in, because you keep thinking that, oh man, it's going to keep falling, this is horrible, this is happening, I can't believe this is happening, it's going to keep falling, I'm not going to buy now, why would I buy when it's going to keep falling, things like that. So it's a little difficult in that scenario, but the rule of thumb is usually when the VIX is this low and it's potentially even lower, it's hard to be long. It's hard to be bullish on the market, and vice versa when it's all the way somewhere up here, and especially in the 30s, right? So keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, but that's more or less what I am seeing moving forward. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button, but ultimately I do expect more or less sideways action for Tesla until potentially, we're getting closer to earnings. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.